Welcome to a Modern Nonprofit podcast, powered by the Charity CFO, your compass for creative solutions in running your nonprofit. I'm Tosha Anderson, your host and guide through this nonprofit maze. From fundraising to volunteer management, we've got your back. Join us each episode for fresh, game-changing strategies that can make a real impact. Hello, nonprofit friends. Welcome back to yet another episode of a Modern Nonprofit podcast. I'm Tosha Anderson. I'm your host. And today I brought my new friend, Dr. Krista Kurlinkus. Krista, you are the founder of Grant Writing Made Easy and CEO of your own grant writing and consulting firm. So you know a lot about grant writing. You've worked with thousands and thousands. I think I read somewhere over 10,000 students with some of your online courses. So first and foremost, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having
conversation. Yeah, absolutely. And today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. We mentioned grant writing, Krista, and as I mentioned, we've talked about grant writing on this podcast before, but you have a little bit different spin on grant writing. And Krista, we're going to talk about AI, artificial intelligence, and how to use AI with grant writing, right?
Yes. Something I think all grant writers should be doing.
I've started personally dabbling in the ChatGPT space just out of pure curiosity. So I'm a little bit familiar. And I've started using it in some of my own kind of content creation, not necessarily for this podcast, but internally, like gave me some guidance on how to build a whole mentorship program within my accounting firm. Wow. And so it's kind of certainly lots of edits, but it gives you a nice starting place. So anyway, I just kind of stumbled across it. I'm like, what is this thing that people are talking about? So let me ask you, how and when did you realize that AI could be used for grant writing?
So right when it came out, November 30th of 2022. Mm-hmm. So I can't even remember how I came across it, probably on TikTok, because I'm honestly on TikTok.
Yeah, who doesn't love TikTok?
I was already aware through social media of software like Jasper AI, Copy AI, and I looked at it and it was very, it's using AI, but it's already feeding it the prompts. And so all of those were related to marketing. So none of it related to grant writing. It didn't work very well. And I was also hesitant about it, like ethically, of course, as everyone has. But when I got into ChatGPT, it's like a blank slate. There are no prompts that are pre-filled for you. You create the prompts. You're the prompt engineer. And so I started working with it with my students and some of my coaching clients and showing them how to use it. And it kind of just went from help them get from kind of very entry level grant writing skills and jump a few steps ahead. And so I started teaching it just as part of my Grant Writing Made Easy course and with my some of my clients. Then we started implementing it with clients. And then I developed the course, Write Your Grant in 1 hour using AI, because I realized this was revolutionary. So I did that back in March of 2023, and I have been iterating and iterating because things change quickly, not to the extent that you can't keep up, but there are always little changes here and there. And so I teach about once a month to that group of students that signed up for that, teaching them all the new tips and tricks and deeper strategies, more advanced strategies. Like the more you learn, the better your results can be.
So speaking of that, so ChatGPT is essentially the software, right? That for those of you that don't know, that have heard about it, like, what is this thing, right? It's essentially a website. You go in, kind of create a free account, or you can get a paid account, I think. And then it's basically like a question, like when we first got introduced to Google, it's like, what? I just like enter a question, or I just enter a phrase, like, what is this, or what is that? And you can enter all kinds of questions. Like for me, what is a good framework for a good mentorship program? Or I'm sure you have things, and you enter in that question, and then it just starts populating a bunch of copy that it pulls from a variety of different sources, right? And it's pretty impressive. I also did a funny thing with ChatGPT, just to give an example and kind of frame, what this tool is for those who don't know. I had a friend that has never been to St. Louis. That's where we're headquartered. That's where I live. born and raised. They had never been here and they were visiting. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to put together a little itinerary? And I was thinking, born and raised in the city, I know all of the hot spots and the tourist places. And I was like, I know what the good places are. Let me see what ChatGPT says, right? And I entered that and it was very lovely. It was very well formatted. It was, you could copy and paste this thing right into an email and it would have been a stellar job for sure. And it was impressive, like how accurate the thing was. Now, people will always say, make sure you read it, make sure you edit it, make sure you fact check some of it. But just to give a little framework, it can be used for a lot of different things. So more specifically, though, for grant writing, you had mentioned that you've been using this tool, you've been training your clients on some of this and participants in your program. What are some practical ways that you've seen people use AI in finding grant writing opportunities? Like, what are some of the specific phases of that process or steps that they've used AI for?
Right. So I have taught using AI to find grant opportunities. I think that is one of the things that's not super great at. I know that was one of the things you wanted to chat about. So I did a little experimentation because I haven't played with it in a while for that purpose. And it's still finding foundations and suggesting things that are not at all appropriate, even if you give it a hyper specific program. So if you say like this nonprofit, this program, it will find a few, and it found a few new ones for me for a client that I was just looking for through Instrumental yesterday. But it will also give you lots of outdated stuff. And that's even using Bard, which has direct access to the internet. So we don't really use it as much for that as we do for program design, drafting, research for the statement of need, revision. So we're using it mostly for the writing and the ideation components even. And even things as simple as I've got 2 lists and I want to make it into a table. I just copy paste it, pop it in ChatGPT and say, put this in a table, and it does it. Little things like that. But we have a set list that I created of prompts. And I'm always trying to learn more and figure out how to make the best prompts. And prompts, if you don't know, are just what you input into it. It's kind of like, I like to frame it as telling an assistant to do a task. And that assistant is not an expert in the field, right? That assistant needs to be given highly specific instructions on how to do the task, not only just well generally, but to your specific needs and liking, right? So we input certain sets of prompts that do everything from give you an organizational history, a statement of need with research incorporated, because now ChatGPT Plus has access to the internet through Bing. Okay, so we could do that. And it's actual, what it incorporates is not made up like it used to be with 3.5, the free version. You can do the same with Bard for free. And everything from incorporating that research, then creating program designs. A lot of times as grant writers, we're also program designers, or we're collaborating with our
new
clients.
Programs or expansion.
So coming up with ideas for them. And that used to be like one of the things I considered a highly special skill that I had, because I have worked with so many different nonprofits all over the world, that I could be like, oh, here's what this type of program typically does. Different fields. Now ChatGPT can tell you that. Come up with monitoring and evaluation plans, timelines, budgets that actually add up correctly.
Okay, that's good.
And so it comes up with all this information. Now, what you do with it, you've got to have that human component, because only you know what you can actually accomplish in your nonprofit. You can't just do what ChatGPT plans for you. You can't just ask for the amounts ChatGPT suggests for you, but it can give you an overall framework. And that framework is going to be based on billions of data points, right? And so it's, to me, a lot of people ask me, is it just a time-saving tool? It is largely a time-saving tool, but it is also going to increase the quality of your proposals if you know how to use it well. And that's the key. Because I've also talked to, people who are struggling with other folks using ChatGPT and getting proposals that are not great. and that haven't been well thought out. And you can tell that they use Chat GPT or Bard or whatever AI.
Right.
Because they used it in its most simplistic way.
Right.
So what's really key is educating yourself on how to use it effectively. And you can really learn how to do that and how to be a decent prompt engineer, they're calling it, in a matter of a few hours. So if you can take that like 2-3 hours to learn the basic skills and critical thinking, right, for it, then you can learn to be really skilled at it.
When you talk about prompts, when I've used it, you use the analogy of the assistant. What it reminds me of is what, you give direction, right? Or you ask a question, and based on the response, you can really gauge how well did I ask that question? How clear were my instructions? Those little games where it's like, follow this instruction. And then, maybe it's in a group setting and people end up with completely different interpretations of what you asked for. So those are the prompts. And I certainly, notice that about AI, that when you're putting in these different prompts, it may not give you a great answer. That doesn't mean that it can't be helpful. It just means, to your point, you need to kind of re-engineer what you're asking or what you're prompting, or trying to phrase it in a little bit different way so that it can scour the internet and put together copy that does in fact get you the information that you're looking for.
Right.
So you had mentioned a few things already, making sure that maybe some numerical tables or properly adding up, or using some specific words that might be relevant to the program that you're trying to build, or comparing different or similar programs. What other ways are you using AI to improve like the quality of application? So I'm imagining a huge time saver, but I would imagine too, like quality.
Right. Okay, so I'll give you one fairly specific example. So one of our clients does a lot of peace and humanitarian work in Syria and Turkey. We are not subject matter experts on the situation. It's complex. It's long, right? It's a very long history. And many topics are like that. So when we were writing our statement of need for, now we've gotten them a UN grant, as well as a Department of State grant, a US Department of State grant, using these methods. We asked ChatGPT to help us understand the conflict in Syria and describe it related to the specific program that this nonprofit was implementing. So using that, they've gotten a 100,000 UN grant and 500,000 Department of State grant for Near East affairs. And that was based on using ChatGPT as a tool. Now, was it, we copied and pasted that and then put it in the grant and sent it in? No.
Right.
And I don't say like rely on it completely in that way. But, even my husband. So my husband is a director of technical writing at the University of Oklahoma. And he's working on, some academic research, and he was working on an article, and he had some, interesting research questions. But then he went into ChatGPT and asked it, what research would you ask about this topic? And it gave him some questions he never would have thought of. So it can be used at any level, and you can even pop things in there and say, revise this to be half the length. It's not going to get you exactly to 500 words or 500 characters. It doesn't quite have that capability yet. It can help you revise something down, whereas, that could take you hours otherwise.
I never thought to say reduce it, because sometimes the output is just so many words, and I never thought to say reduce it. That makes a lot of sense. Question for you. Speaking of copy, one of the things that I've noticed in the nonprofit world, especially when you're writing technical grants, right? Typically, it's the programmatic folks oftentimes that will be writing some of the grants, right? Because they have more of the programmatic knowledge. Sometimes it's grant writers trying to pull that information out of program folks. Sometimes these get extremely technical, and I think that it makes sense in some ways. But I will say, from someone that's worked in the nonprofit space for I don't know, I haven't seen 15 years for a couple of years now. So probably coming up on 20 years. That sometimes it feels to me as someone that's looking at kind of from an outsider leaning in. And I'm talking about things from like websites to newsletters to annual reports. It feels like sometimes there's a lot of words trying to say something that is not easily understood. And I'm thinking, what are we trying to say here?
Right.
It's like I said, it's not always very concise. It's not very clear. We have tendencies to use a lot of buzzwords that might make sense for a small portion of the people. But I think and I'm guilty of this too as an accountant, right? And anybody in any sort of profession takes for granted their jargon. And I mean, fill in the blank of which industry, right? We all are guilty of this. And I wonder, does ChatGPT or some of these other AI platforms too, do they phrase these things in kind of more plain English? So if you needed more of a technical speak, as you were kind of using that example, does it give it more of a plain English approach than maybe somebody that's more technically driven would have probably written it if they were to do it all alone?
Absolutely, if you ask it to. That's a great example. So one of the things that we use it for in kind of my teaching space, so I do the client work, I also do teaching, right? We'll input writing and ask it to provide critique, feedback, revision suggestions. So it can kind of act as a writing tutor. And if you have a specific concern, like, I'm concerned that I'm using too much technical jargon, please rewrite this paragraph or page to be understood by a lay audience. It will do that. You can feed it like a lot of your own writing and say, please learn my writing style, tone, and voice. And then give it a new piece of writing or a new topic and say, please write in that style, tone, and voice.
Interesting.
And it can more replicate your voice so that it's not, a lot of people say, oh, I can tell when something's been written by ChatGPT. Yeah, but they could be using it in a way that you could not tell that it was written by ChatGPT.
I didn't see it. I'm learning all these new things. I didn't realize that because a lot of times I'm more of a casual. I used to be more of a formal writer when I was working in public accounting and professional services and that. Now that I've been on my own and been an entrepreneur and running this organization for 7 years now, that I certainly have gotten a little bit more authentic with who I am. So that's a little bit more casual. And it's interesting because I've spent a great deal of time rewriting a lot of copy for my firm and just in other correspondence that used to be very, let's think, educational, technical, right? Just very stuffy. Let's be honest, accounting firms tend to be very stuffy. And it's how do I get this to speak in my voice and have a more approachable, lighthearted, casual way of speaking. But I didn't realize ChatGPT did that. See, I thought I just had to hire copywriters for everything, and they, have to meet with me and hear me speak and listen to all my content and pick up on all of that and figure out how to translate my words or their ideas into my words and put it all on copy. So I never knew that. Interesting.
Yeah, and a new feature, I believe it's only in the paid version of ChatGPT, but it used to be that it was only learning within a singular conversation. If you don't know, ChatGPT and Bard have conversations. So when you change topics or genres like that you want to write for, you need to open a new conversation or chat. Now in ChatGPT, you can give it an overall, like, here's who I am, here's what I do for work. That's what you're using it for. And, here's kind of my voice in the settings. And then it starts to incorporate that. So there are always new developments coming out like that that are advancing it pretty rapidly, at least to me.
So we've talked a lot about ChatGPT, obviously, because that's, I think, the one that's, oftentimes in the media headlines and on social media and that sort of thing. Are there any other user-friendly tools or platforms that you recommend, added bonus if they're pretty inexpensive or free options that
Yeah.
you think, I know we're talking about grant writing, but we've also started talking about other opportunities that maybe you've seen nonprofits successful in using these platforms. Maybe it's for, and I've just heard social media or marketing, or just using the example of website copy or newsletters, or I don't
Mhm.
know. Are there other platforms that you would recommend?
So another one that we use all the time, I usually open both ChatGPT and this one side by side and use them back and forth, is Bard. So that's Google's free one.
Bard.
Okay.
How do you spell that? I keep hearing like,
Bard, like,
okay,
Shakespearean bard.
gotcha.
So that's a free one. Now, there are also systems that implement the AI, like ChatGPT through it, right? Or like through
Mm-hmm.
GPT 3.5 or 4.0. So Grantable is one of those,
Mm-hmm.
nonprofit operating system. And, there are new ones coming out all the time. So those
Sure.
are two of the core ones. So Grantable is pretty cool because you have a limit of how much text you could feed ChatGPT or Bard.
Mm-hmm.
There's no limit within Grantable. It's kind of processing it for you. You can put in entire grants, and you set up folders and put in entire documents and explain to Grantable what it is, and then it remembers that. And then you
Mm-hmm.
can go in and have it generate grants by putting the RFP into Grantable and saying, now generate a grant for
Oh,
this program
interesting.
within my nonprofit. So that's pretty cool.
Mm.
Uh, Nonprofit operating system is like that, but it also does like what you're talking about. So copy, social media, um, anything like donor letters, whatever you can think of, thank you letters. It does all of that as well. So there's always going to be systems that are paid that are implementing AI. I always like to teach ChatGPT and Bard because that's what's behind it, right? That's what they're using
Mm-hmm.
to run it, and they're
Mm-hmm.
creating the prompts. And then you put in your text and it feeds it into the prompt, into the AI, and then spits it out. So I'm kind of like the person who's like, I want to learn the HTML and the CSS, even though I'm going to use WordPress to design the site. I want to be able to know how it's working and what I can do if I'm not satisfied with it, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
So that's why I like to teach how to do prompt engineering for grants specifically. And then once you have that skill, you could figure it out for anything, for any type of writing. Once you understand the principles behind it, you can do it.
Wow. Well, that's fascinating. Who knew? All these great things. And, I think one of the things I always hear and that I often see, you would have maybe a development person that, especially for smaller organizations, which we tend to work somewhere between like $1 and $10 million. So, I spend a lot of time with organizations within that size, probably you too. And they typically have maybe a development associate that is also like a volunteer coordinator and is also their social media person, is also writing the newsletters, doing all the grants, doing the donor thank you letters. And there's just never enough time for all of these people to do, I'm sorry, all of these jobs to be done by one person. And
Right.
I think leveraging tools like this, especially tools that are very low cost point, and or free, could really save quite a bit of time and probably, frankly, improve the quality of some of this when you're not
Yeah.
worrying as much about spelling and grammar and things like that, even on basic terms. But also just kind of thinking of just help me develop a framework.
Mm-hmm.
And then I could fill in things that maybe ChatGPT would not know, specific and individualized to my organization or a various program or a new program or whatever. I could see where this would be a huge time saver, for someone in this role. And I think it's also fair to say that if you're a grant writer that's also in charge of, say, social media or newsletter writing, you might be really great at writing grants, but maybe you're lacking on social media creativity. And so
Right. That's
having
me.
something else like to help prompt you to like,
Yeah.
okay, I
Yeah.
need a little bit of help with the idea generation, and then I can take it from there. I think so many of us in the nonprofit world, we wear many, many hats that frankly we're probably not naturally gifted in. And so,
Mhm.
I look at some of these tools. How do we use those tools to supplement the areas maybe we're not super, super great at? And maybe you
And
have a great, donor development person that's great with like individual relationships and cultivating those relationships, but maybe technical grant writing is something that they really struggle with. So, yeah.
that's That perfectly describes why I do what I do. So I started with consulting, and it's very expensive to hire a consultant, right? That's why you work with the clients that you work with. You're not working with those that are under $1 million because they can't afford it.
Right.
For me, I do that, but also I work with clients who have 250K budgets, and a lot of my students are well below that in terms of their annual budget. And so I created my courses because I was like, we need to democratize access to grant funding for these smaller nonprofits who are really listening to their communities and are built through their communities rather than top down, right? So giving them access to the skill of grant writing without making them go through a year or more of training to be able to do it really well is super important to me, because they don't want to be writing. Writing is not their forte. They're trying to run their programs and grow and scale. So to me, this is not about eliminating someone's job. It's about giving skills, AI skills to people who can then focus on what they're really skilled at, like you're saying. And then, of course, for us with our clients, helping for us do the work more quickly and sometimes get really much better ideas than we would have had on our own.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. So you've mentioned a couple examples where you've used AI for some of your clients. Any other good examples or real life examples of a client that's been really successful using this either in grant writing or otherwise in some other area?
So we've really used this across with all of our clients. And so pretty much any successes that we've had in the last year, we have used AI to implement those. So anything from a small foundation grant to, a 1.5 million Department of Labor grant, we have used AI. And I know sometimes people are hesitant about the ethical ramifications of it. And I say, definitely look into it, think about it. For me, the ethics of giving people access to funding is more top of mind for what I'm doing right now. So yeah, any client work that we have done, including academic research clients, we have used AI, and specifically with our academic clients, we've talked to them and said, like, hey, do you care if we use AI to help us with this? And so far, fine with it. And that's been really interesting too. And because my husband is still in academia and I used to be, I'm very kind of in touch with what's going on with that community, but researchers are using it. But everybody does need to get some in-depth training on it so that they can actually produce the quality that folks are expecting.
I think you're kind of highlighted some of the misinformation, I think, when it comes to, AI, right? Certainly there are those cases where people are using the content quite literal. And I think there's this fear that it's not accurate. People aren't checking that information, making sure that it's accurate or that it's spreading more misinformation and just sending it out into the world. I look at it really, like I said, for idea creation, creating a framework, certainly should edit it. I love the tips that you said of putting this in my own voice, paring it down, or even just, being mindful of, hey, I wrote this really technical paragraph, put this in, English for me, or, try to paraphrase this or make this a little bit more concise. And I look at this tool is really like the next or most modern version of, think about when we went from like typewriters to Microsoft Word, and they would suggest rearranging your sentences for concise paragraphs, or spelling or grammar checks. Now they have this add-on called Grammarly, which a lot of people use, right? When they're writing any copy anywhere, on websites or otherwise, where it makes recommendations on how you should phrase this differently because it doesn't sound very pleasant. Or, there's all these different tools that help us continue to better construct our thoughts or communicate. So thank you for kind of highlighting some of those, what I think, like I said, is a bit of misinformation. I think it could probably be used in the wrong way. And you can probably say that about a lot of things. But I think there's so much benefit to be gained in a variety of different departments or spaces within the nonprofit community that it's worth at least considering. So,
Right.
And highlighting too how easy it is. I know I've done it myself, but more just out of curiosity, how easy it is to kind of get set up and running, to just start playing with it and kind of figuring it out. So,
Right. Right.
so
And if you get frustrated and you're like, I can't get what I'm looking for, I don't know how to ask this, I'm not specific enough, just a quick hack for you. Ask it how to ask the question. Say, what information do you need from me to write a stellar XYZ, whatever it is you're writing?
well, that's
and
so interesting.
It will tell you.
That's so interesting. So, Krista, I know there's probably people that are very interested in hearing more about this, probably like me when I first started, probably very overwhelmed. If people are interested in connecting with you, I know you've created some online courses, you have a lot of content. You also work as a consultant for nonprofits or help them with their grant writing. If there are people that want to hear a little bit more or get in touch with you to hear more about how they can either learn from you on how to do it themselves, right? They're maybe on that smaller organization, or, hey, I've got enough on my plate, I need to add this to the mix. How can I hire you? Like, what are the ways people can connect with you on those things?
The best way to find me is at grantwritingmadeeasy.com.
Okay.
And that's my handle on most social media, at Grant Writing Made Easy on Instagram. That's how I am on Facebook. I'm also on TikTok a little bit under my name, Krista Kurlinkus. But yeah, I have a course that will teach you how to get started with AI and then how to go deeper. I usually do about one training a month, kind of expanding on what I've taught in the basics in my course.
Okay.
It's called Write Your Grant in 1 hour using AI. And you can find that on writingmadeeasy.com. It's always open, always accepting new students. So whenever this comes out, it still should be open.
Yeah. Well, Krista, if you can figure out how to use AI to stay in compliance with all of these grants that we get, right? That would be the next version of that. I've had people reach out to me, Tasha, can we use AI for accounting? I wish, right? We're not quite there. Unfortunately, in the nonprofit world, we have so many different dimensions that we have to track. All of our revenues and costs. Is it restricted? Is it unrestricted? Is it for a specific grant? What period is this for? What line item is this for? And once we exhaust this fund of resources, then we have to move on to the next grant that funds this initiative. I wish it were that simple, and maybe that's why I follow AI so closely, to maybe make it a little bit easier for us to do the work even that we do. But hey, let's seize the opportunities where they exist. And it sounds like this might be a good option. And just to highlight anybody listening, reach out to Krista on your website. I think you mentioned, and we'll put it in the show notes here too. Grant Writing Made Easy. Want to make sure I didn't misspeak there, and follow you on social media. Like you said, you have some content you're sharing there. Krista, I want to thank you again for joining us. It's been really insightful. I'm a techie at heart. So I appreciate any hacks and modern ways that we can be doing the work that we do. I always say the work is hard enough, so why make it even harder? So thank you again for your tips and words of wisdom.
Thank you, Tasha. I really appreciate you having me on here. And I'm actually going to send you all after this a link to a free grant writing with AI prompt cheat sheet that I made. So your listeners can have that as well.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Well, thank you. And for all of our listeners out there, do me a favor. If you found this content helpful, help me help other nonprofits find this content by engaging with it some way, regardless of what platform you're on. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like, share. If you're listening to a streaming platform, leave a review, like, share. All of that engagement helps other people find content like this. So until next time, we'll see you then. Bye, friends.
That's all we have for you today. Once again, I'm Tosha Anderson with the Charity CFO, and this is a Modern Nonprofit Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to a Modern Nonprofit Podcast on all major streaming platforms so you will stay notified for when the latest episode drops, which will help you stay in the know about anything nonprofit related. Also, join our community on Facebook by searching for a Modern Nonprofit Podcast and follow us on all of our social media accounts. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.